Hey y'all, my name is Tamra Andress. I am your Fit and Faith podcast host. I'm pumped to be here. Just me, no words, no scripts, no intros, no outros. I love authenticity. I hope to breed vulnerability. And I usually do this alongside another dreamer, mover, shaker, entrepreneur, passionista is what I love to call them. If you're a dude, then a dude. But I am loving just coming together in community with other people to share their high and low stories, to share their journeys to comeback, because I believe ultimately that's where God would have us. He would have us on the mountaintop. And even though we learn a ton in the pit and in the valley, God would want us right now, especially in this season of life, in this time of our culture, to shine. And so here I am. I want to teach you how to shine. I want to be alongside you when you get your glow. I want to catapult you into your calling, whatever that is. So this isn't a fitness podcast. This is not a religious banter, though we preach Jesus all day long. And this is not just about nutrition or health or wealth, though I like some green, and I know you do too. It's not okay for us to not be okay with talking about all of these things in unison. You guys, we don't just need a mental health podcast. We don't just need a fitness podcast. We don't just need a religious, spiritual podcast. It needs to blend. This is what Fit and Faith is all about. It's all about creating alignment, connectivity. It's about pursuing your wholeness and claiming it over your life and over the lives of the loved ones that you have around you in your community. So thank you for tuning in. I would love to get to know you more. You can like, review, subscribe, whatever it is. Send me an email, DM me. It's me. I have an amazing team alongside me, but you guys are getting me for now. So enjoy. I'm so pumped to have a coffee conversation with you, is what I'd love to call them. Don't have my coffee right now, but I have it in my system, as you can see. All the love. Let's do this together and keep going for your dreams, y'all. All right, we are live. We're so excited to be coming to you today, hopefully in the comfort of your own home. If you're somewhere in the world, that's beautiful, maybe outside, having a nice brisk walk to get your body moving, which, by the way, is kind of a part of today's introduction with the guest that we have on. This is Rebecca George Dotson. I'm so thrilled for you guys to be in connection and now community with her. She is a woman that does all the things. And sometimes people hate that when people tell me that from like a busy perspective. It drives me bananas. But really, she's doing some beautiful things. She's a pastor's wife, which my best friend is a pastor's wife, and she hates to be called that. So you are a pastor in and of itself. And I know that role takes on so many different elements. So we'll talk about that. She's also a ministry leader for 818, is that right? 818 Ministries. And she's also a blogger and a podcaster as well. You guys are definitely going to be directed to her podcast because I've been tuning in, and it is just a breath of fresh air. I love all of the different people that you host, so I'm so thrilled to be your host today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Tamra. I've been so excited to chat with you. This is going to be fun.
It is. So let's jump in kind of to the topic that I started to unpack. Like, tell me about that journey of and incorporate you, because it's not just about the role that you play. It's how you emerged into your relationship and now marriage and all those things.
Sure. Okay. So we'll start with marriage. So I got married last May 18th. So we are fastly approaching our first anniversary.
Yay! You're a newlywed. I love that.
I know. That feels nuts.
It does.
Yeah, God is so cool. You know, that line that you hear when you're a kid of, you know, you may know your spouse, but you don't know that you already know your spouse, that whole thing. I was always super annoyed when people told me that when I was single. And then my husband and I actually met years before we started dating. We went to the same church. He was on staff at the church I went to, and I taught Sunday school class in the ministry he led, and we crossed paths. And then years later, after he had moved to Mississippi, where we live now, to become a lead pastor of a church down here, we reconnected and started dating and got married last year. So
that is like my ideal situation for my daughter or son. Very different than my own, but my ideal situation for my daughter or son.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Great. It's a wild season. We dated long distance, which is the hardest thing ever. And I'm thankful for it now because we got just the opportunity to know each other on, I think, a deeper level than when you live in the same place and you have the luxuries of grabbing pizza on a Thursday night with your friends and, just things that you don't have. When you're just really dug in, and we dated for about 6 months and got married last year. So
wow.
It's an adventure.
That is really exciting. So are you guys where you moved? Is that a fresh space, meaning neither of your families are there?
Correct. So
okay.
I grew up in Mississippi,
okay,
on another part of the state.
Uh-huh.
So mom still lives in Mississippi, and my family lives up in Tennessee, where we both moved down from.
Okay.
He lived in Knoxville, and so did I for a very long time. And he was pretty well established here by the time I came around.
Okay.
So I kind of entered into his fold and his community. And so, that's been a lot of change. Probably the most amount of change I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah. I could imagine that would be very difficult, especially knowing that he did and has established himself, where it's like you have your group of friends, and it's not that you don't want to be in the fold of his friends, but you kind of have your own identity in that too. And so navigating that, and then being away from home and your comfort zone, and he's in his comfort zone, I feel like that'd be tough.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has. Yeah. I had a mentor of mine sit me down a few months after we had gotten married, and she said, there's 5 major changes that we go through in life. So one could be divorce if you were to go through that. Marriage is one, a change in job, a move. I think there's 5 of them, and there were 3 that I kind of at the blink of an eye went through, along with becoming a lead pastor's wife.
Yeah.
So, I think God really just showed me in that season that, it's okay to hold both, grieving the loss of what I had and the community that I had, and really processing that, which I, as an Enneagram 3, did not do in the beginning. I just kind of stepped it all because I was getting married and all of those joyful things, and I didn't want to process the hard stuff, but I got to a place where I had to, and so she really taught me, it's okay to hold both that and the joy and the pleasures of marriage and all of this in a new season kind of simultaneously. That's okay to do, And so, we're still kind of adjusting and learning, but it's been a great year.
Yeah.
So.
I've had a little bit of insight from different people as well, because it was something I walked through in a trial perspective of not actually leaving and cleaving, which is like a biblical, concept of the need of when to become one, and you leave and cleave to your now partner. So as I said, so far, a lot of our things are different. We're both Enneagram 3s, so there's a lot of similarity in that. Yes. And so my husband and I, when we started dating, we moved in together before we were married. And then we ended up moving like 17 houses down from my parents, who my mom was like my BFF. She's still one of my best friends to this day. But that created what we thought would be this amazing experience. And I'm still very grateful that I got to be that close to her for so long, and my dad as well. But there was no leaving and cleaving in that scenario at all. Like, I was still so rooted in my family dynamics. Our relationship was constantly with my family, and his parents were only 3 miles down the road. So just a lot of things that we had to walk through in the uncovering of what does it mean to just be us, and to develop that identity as a married couple versus to develop that identity as a dating, couple, or even as parents. Like, we even parented like alongside my parents that were like right down the road. So we had to do that 4 years into marriage. So girl, you're in the right place. You're doing the right things, and you're navigating waters that are so much better to do now than it is to do later, because that's a really hard thing.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah. And I think we were sort of forced into the whole leave and cleave situation.
Yep.
So
Yep.
my family is so supportive, and my mom and dad both are 2 of my best friends in the universe. But,
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, just the physical separation is really, I think, and I hope and I pray, long term has been a great thing for our marriage.
Yeah.
Because we've had to figure it out together.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And there's no for me, because my mom was also my best friend and she was right down the street, I would just be like, okay, I'm going down to my mom's, and literally just leave. And it wasn't that it was a bad thing. It just wasn't the best thing. And so it's really, I think it's something for us to be mindful of, that it's not that God would have us remove ourselves from our families. That's not our intent. It's just that we're now starting and cultivating a new family and a new home. And the things that you're bringing from your past, that they're not always the best things. And your together is different than your individual. So what is that two become one looking like? And what does God have in store for your future versus clinging so much to what you know as comfort and, establishment? It's been an interesting process. So I've interestingly had a lot of newlyweds on the podcast recently. So I don't know if God's teaching me something, but I really like it.
Oh, that's so fun. Yeah, I love that.
We're about to hit year 8 married and 12 years together.
Oh, that's so incredible.
Yeah.
How awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Old?
We have a 5 and a 6-year-old. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, very fun. Lots of marriage stories to go alongside that. But we are together and happy, and I'm very grateful. So tell me, I want to go a little bit deeper from this pastor's wife perspective, because I know so many in that community. Oh no, somebody just said that they can't hear you. How is that possible? Hold on. 1 second. Can you hear now? That's horrible.
1, 2, 3.
We might be starting over, and I just got a chance to get to know you, and that is A-okay. Let me make sure. Start talking a little bit, Rebecca. Just say hello. And
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone.
Oh, no. Interestingly, there was all these viewers on in the past, I don't even know how many minutes we've been on, and not one person said that until just now.
That's crazy.
I'm and they stayed on for a long time. Maybe it's her computer. Hold on 1 second. Let me confirm, because that would be a bummer.
That would be a bummer.
Calling mom.
Perfect.
Hey, I can hear you, but I can barely hear her.
You can't hear her? Barely hear her?
Barely, okay.
She said that.
Let me try putting some earbuds in. I don't know if that would help.
Okay, she said she can hear you, but not loud. Or can you still hear her as you're listening? I changed one thing.
Okay, I'm going to plug some earbuds in.
Can you hear? Now you can hear her better? Very interesting. Okay. All right, thanks.
Does this help at all?
She said she could hear you better.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's...
cool.
Well, I don't know if we should start over.
No.
I feel like we're going to. Let's just start fresh. Welcome to the Fit and Faith podcast. I am really excited to introduce you to a gal. We've been moving and shaking for the last few minutes, but I guess nobody heard us. So we're going to circle back because I feel like it was so good. And I know so many community members who are in the mini boats that Rebecca's currently in and navigating. And so I think it's really important that we go there again. And I always feel like when there's glitches, especially if it's a tech glitch, there's always like God in the mist, right? Oh, Mom said don't start over. Whatever, we're just going to keep conversating. I'm so excited that you're here with us. And I'm going to jump into the question that I had just asked and kind of get us rolling again, get us back in our mojo. I had mentioned that you came into the fold of being a pastor's wife, but you were already a ministry leader with your ministry, right?
Yep.
A18 ministry. So unpack what that is, unpack what that role has played for you, and now bringing that into the current space that you're in as a pastor's wife.
Yeah. Okay. So, man, there's a lot of layers to that.
Yeah, there
I'll try
is.
to button it up well. So my mom went through a cancer journey a few years ago. She's a breast cancer survivor.
and which we're so thankful for. She's about 5 years into being cancer-free, and through that journey, God really put the people group on my heart of people facing things similar to her. And so I guess about 6 years ago, I launched a ministry called 818 Ministries, and what we did was we collected handmade hats, sewn, crocheted, and knitted from all over the U.S. We had people coming to us from, I think over 25 states. It was incredible.
Wow.
Who had so much creativity, and a lot of them were grandmothers who would go watch their kids at soccer games, and they would just crochet hats because they had made all the things that they really wanted to make for them and their people, and they just wanted to use their gift that God had given them to impact people. And so we packaged those with handwritten letters of encouragement, and we delivered them into hospitals. And so we would go into adult settings and deliver them. We would go into children's hospitals and deliver them. Most times in a children's hospital, we would dress up like princesses and superheroes and go and deliver them. We worked with St. Jude and just like a host of other hospitals, and it was one of the greatest adventures and seasons of my life. I was single. I had a ton of free time on my hands. I lived in a college town.
Yeah, as a 3, that's like everything, right? As a 3, you're like, all the time is mine.
Yes. And so, I mean, I was traveling all the time.
Wow.
I would just round up college students from different college ministries, and we would go to St. Jude. We would go to Children's Healthcare Atlanta.
Wow.
We would do the thing, which is what we're about to get to. So which was so fun. And so I got to walk alongside a lot of college students, and I got to speak a lot. And when I spoke, people would come have me share my story and my mom's testimony through her journey and kind of what God was doing through that ministry. And when I did, what I started to discover was, every time you speak, you tell your story, you do your thing, you give your message, you finish, and then typically you have time to talk to people afterwards, right? And so I would always have these conversations that would center around people coming to me and saying, man, I love what God did through your mom's story, and I have my own version of that. So here's what's going on in my life, and here's what I feel like God's maybe nudging me to do, but either I'm terrified, I'm overwhelmed, I'm fearful of what that could mean for my life and for my family. I don't know what first step to take. I don't know what that's supposed to look like. I'm praying about it, but what did you do? And so I had enough of those conversations that God really began to give me a heart for what I do now, which we'll get to. But I think he really used that season of ministering with 818 Ministries to kind of lead me where I am today in my current season of life. But yeah, it is interesting, kind of back to pastor's wifing. My husband and I both ministered a lot separately prior to marriage. I think a lot of ministry couples grow up in ministry together. And we didn't. I didn't marry the youth guy that then became the associate pastor that then became the lead pastor, right? Like I had my ministry. I was running in my lane, and he had his. He was running in his lane, and it sounds so cliche. And so I'm sorry if you're listening and you're single and you're sick of hearing this, but I was in my lane running, he was in his lane running, and it was almost just like we looked to the right one day, and it was like, okay, he's running his race and I'm running mine, and God has called us to run our races together. And so kind of now that's where we are in marriage, which is so fun. I love being able to walk alongside him as his wife, getting to see him live out just the thing that he is called to do in shepherding people and leading our church. And he is so supportive of me and my speaking and writing and all of that. And so it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done. So
really cool. That's really awesome. I think that's so good. And I also think that there's a lot of testimony in the point of just because that's one hat that you wear doesn't mean that's your only identity. And I am a huge person about like titles and roles and really not claiming those, but allowing God to like put his final seal on what it is that you do. And even like your business card, like he is the CEO, not any of us, no matter what roles we end up taking on. And even author, like I now have this ability to like put author to my name. And I think that's so cool, but it's a little bit of like a weird trepidation space because I'm like, oh gosh, he's the author. Like I didn't do that. I wouldn't proclaim that story. And like no one just goes out into public and like raises their hand and like airs their dirty laundry. Like that's not usually how things work like that. So it's just been an interesting thing. And I love how you've just continued to walk out what you've been called to do. And it just blends so beautifully with what he's doing. So share a little bit more about like do the thing, because we also have a lot of people here that are entrepreneurs. And I am all about like sharing that journey, because the biggest thing for me, and it might be different for you, but I really believe that it's often a very messy process. And if you see those like images where like people believe entrepreneurship like is this beautiful straight line, but really it's like all of this like crazy conjolted situation, and you have to work your way through all of those spaces. And there is a lot of upward movement even in our failure. But tell us about your specific journey. And obviously you started with the ministry and then kind of God unfolding what it is that Do the Thing would be. But how did that get started?
Yeah, so I went to a conference a couple of years ago. She speaks, I don't know if
yes, I've gone twice.
Before, but it's so good.
Yes.
So I went in 2015 and I went back in 2018.
Okay, we were there the same year.
I signed up to go this year. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. We'll see what they do with it this year.
I know. Are you signed up to go yet?
Yeah, I am.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if it's in person or it's virtual.
Yeah.
We don't know yet. But yeah, I went to that conference with a book idea a couple years ago, and I sat in front of a couple publishers and agents and put in front of them what I thought was, when you spend time on something that's so near and dear to your heart, you feel like, oh, this is a complete full thought idea. And then you put it in front of somebody in the industry, and then you realize, wow, these are all the things that I didn't think of, and this is actually really half-baked, right? Yeah. And so I sat down in the middle of that conference with Nikki Koziars. So she's an author. She does a lot of work with Proverbs 31. A lot of you've probably heard of her. We sat down over lunch one day when we were there, and I started just sharing my heart about these conversations that I mentioned earlier that I just continued having with these, aspiring entrepreneurs or aspiring ministry leaders. And she said, Rebecca, I think you know who you want to talk to, but right now you've led this ministry for years. But I don't think you've quite figured out who and what your identity is as a writer and speaker. And so I think when you go home, like that's what I would start to really pray about is what does it look like as God continues, leading you forward in your writing and speaking, because I think that who your audience is, but what's that actually going to look like? And so we sat there and we just spitballed phrase ideas for the longest time, and it was so fun. And I walked out of there and I sat in the lobby of that hotel and I bought the domain for my website.
Oh, that's so cool.
So Do the Thing wasn't available, and so I bought Do the Thing movement really as a way to kind of speak to, I felt called to speak to a body of people, a movement of people who are pressing forward and doing the thing that God's called them to do. And so really it started out as a blog a couple years ago, and so I just started to kind of create content on a regular basis. I knew I wanted to do a podcast, but I needed to be in a season where it made sense, because as you know, podcasting is a ton of work. It sounds great. It's really cute. It's fun to have one, but it is a ton of work. And so I waited until we got married last spring, and we live in a super small town, so there's just not a lot going on around here, and I have more time on my hands than I did when I lived somewhere that was more of a city-based kind of place. And so now that I have the space to do that, it's been so fun just to gather conversations and people that inspire and motivate me in my own walk with Christ and in my own journey, just to talk about really holistically anything that would apply to that person that I would be talking to after a speaking engagement, right? And so that's where I am now, and I'm also working on my first book.
Yay!
So
is it different than your original concept?
The podcast book community.
Yeah. Is the book different than the concept that you pitched at your first She Speaks? It is.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a lot of living in, what, 5 years?
Yeah. This has been like 5 years in the making, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And I actually pulled up the first book proposal that I wrote the other night.
Yeah.
And just laughed. It was hilarious to look over it now, just and see where God's led that. So not really to a place where I can share a ton yet, but I'm so pumped about it. It's going to be so fun to share. So
let me tell you a little bit about that experience from a different perspective, because 2 years when I went to She Speaks, I had already written probably half of my book at that point. And it was something that God gifted me in the middle of a coffee shop one day after having a conversation with my personal trainer that morning. I mean, literally landed out of nowhere through a prophetic experience that I had actually given to somebody else. So, wild story. I've shared it on the podcast before, so I'll have to link either that or the blog to you that I wrote up about it so that you can go back. Though I know that there's new listeners now, but know that God will plant a seed either through multiple people or along the way that eventually one day, similar to how you and your husband were like running separate paths and you looked over, one day you're going to look over and there's just going to be this bloomed flower. And you're going to be like, that's a beautiful flower. How did that get there? That came out of nowhere. Really, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's been continual watering and continual toiling of the soil that it's been within, and now it's ready for you to pluck and smell and enjoy. Well, when I went to the She Speaks conference and when I first got, picked up the flower, if you will, I wanted to show everyone this flower, okay? It was like, look at this flower. This is so cool. This came out of nowhere. It planted so quickly. Within 7 days, had written 165 pages. And just wild. I'm telling you, a week prior, I had no idea I was going to write a book in that capacity. So go to She Speaks, similar to you, pitch the idea. I did have people really interested in it, an agent and a publishing house. And at the event, they said on stage at the very end, Lisa Turkers was speaking, and she said, 30% of you, 100% of the people who got their book card passed to them saying, yes, we're interested, let's go further. 30% of them are going to do absolutely nothing with it. And I thought to myself, and I was like, what crazy person would have done all of this legwork to get here, pitched a book and gone through all the nerves and all of the concept ideation phases and all of that, and then there's nothing. Well, that happened to me. I was in that 30%. And it was with a multitude of life scenarios that had kind of unraveled at that point, some family dynamic changes that were happening that were taking every bit of energy that I had. There was no writing, creativity going on at all at that point. And then some things started to blossom again, and I finally was like, okay, I need to pick that flower up. And what the flower was that I had originally thought was so beautiful had grown into something different. And grown into something more fruitful, if you will. And so re-evaluating that over the course of your 5 years, tell me how the storyline has just blossomed, and what things have you picked up along the way to now get where you are now?
Oh man, yeah. I think if you would have talked to me at She Speaks 2015, I think you would have found me in a place where I felt like I was going to lead this nonprofit for the rest of my life. This is what I felt called to do till the day I meet Jesus. Yeah. And I'm going to travel, and I'm going to lead these teams to go do this thing, and I'm going to write a book about what God teaches me through it. Mm-hmm. That's about all I had figured out. Yeah. And I think what I hadn't discovered, at, 25 years old at that point, was that life does happen, like you're saying. So to a listener who maybe feels stuck or feels like, they've got family dynamics to play where they're not having time to write or create or whatever it is, give yourself grace for that, because God's going to teach you a lot through this, whatever this is that you're facing right now, that's going to lead you to your next steps of faith. And so I don't think, I wasn't supposed to write the book 5 years ago. Right. And I know that now. I would be terrified to think of the book that I would have written 5 years ago. Now that I'm in a place where, I've got almost a full manuscript. Yeah. And I'm thankful that God didn't pave that way at She Speaks 2015. I wasn't ready. Yeah. And there was a lot that he needed to show me, and he knew the season in my life that I needed to be in in order to do this and in order to be ready. And so I would just encourage listeners with that. And, I think another thing, back to how entrepreneurship is so messy, is it's okay to pivot. I don't think any of us probably land in the same space or speaking to the same audience or maybe doing the same work that we had originally thought. And that's okay. That's actually awesome. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are also multi-passionate. I know you are. I know I am. And I think, a lot of times it's really just focusing in on, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that God would make the most impact in this season, or what do you want me to focus my time on? Because I don't want to miss the forest for the trees and be so focused on all these like micro things that I miss the big picture of what you want to do in my life. So help me, move forward in that which would most bring you glory. And right now for me, that's the podcast and the book. And so the hard part of that is I've totally scaled back on what 818 Ministries looked like before I got married. Right? I'm a pastor's wife, and I know that in this season I'm supposed to write the book and do the podcast. And so that changes things. And for an entrepreneur who's super tied and there's a very much of a heart piece behind what you do and what you love and who you serve, that can be really hard to navigate. But God has met me in that. And
that's so good. So tell me about, you can't say the storyline of the book, but tell me about what kind of lessons have you learned that are going to impact people in that regard? Like, who would your target market be for your book, even if you can't share necessarily what's in it?
Yeah. So target market would be people who feel stuck. So we all have times in our lives where, similar to what I described after a speaking engagement, I'm talking to people afterwards. People would come to me with like glistening eyes of like hope, of telling me, what they feel like God has called them to do. But there was always a point where they, let reality set in, and they would then admit to me, this feels too scary, or that step of faith feels way too overwhelming to me. That's too much. Or what are the people in my life going to think of this? And so they would project just this imaginary judgment on themselves, or what have you, right? And so I do feel comfortable saying this. I talk to over 100 of my people. So entrepreneurs, church planters, ministry leaders, multi-level marketing people. I mean, anybody who has went from point A to point B of, okay, I feel called, and they took the step of faith and they did the thing. And I asked them questions. And so really the book is about unpacking what they told me.
Cool.
So
that's really cool. So are you familiar with Brene Brown?
Yes.
Yeah. So that makes me think of, she's a research storyteller, and that's essentially what you've done, which is so neat. And I think as an entrepreneurial coach, like that's often how I'm led to coach people in a certain direction, because I've had all of these other coaching clients that have come along and they're in that space. And so there's constantly a discussion about breaking, hindering mindsets and analysis paralysis and the overwhelm that can leave you frozen, which is analysis paralysis or imposter syndrome or any of those things.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool that there's going to be a resource that I can be like, go here, read this, then we'll work together.
Yes.
That's really awesome.
We're gonna have so much to talk about over the next couple years.
know.
So this is gonna be fun.
So cool. So I want I'm gonna share people the podcast image here. So Do the Thing Movement podcast. You guys, I want you to definitely go check it out. Not only do you get to enjoy her Tennessee accent that I love so much, you get to really unpack similar like-hearted communities to what the Fit and Faith podcast is about, which I really love. And I love that there are so many different ways that people, present a platter of food, if you will. My husband is all about, he's a chef and he's such a presentation person. So when he cooks something, he's not a chef by career, he's a chef by hobby. But when he cooks something, I'm like, put it out. I'm about to eat it. It's not a big deal. And he's like, no. Like, wait, you have to you present it in such a way. So you go to those fancy restaurants, you're like, this is gorgeous. So he's all about eating with your eyes before you divulge. And I really love not only what you've done with your podcast, but what you've done with your website and just the presentation of Do the Thing, I think is so inviting. And I think that's the biggest key component of what it is that you're preparing for people, is this welcoming invitation that doing the thing is scary, but it is also very possible.
Yeah. And I would echo that right back to you. I think we are cut from the same cloth.
Yes.
And serve a lot of the same people. And so, I've just been so looking forward to talking with you and excited to see just where God takes you. And I know this won't be our first and only conversation. I know I'm having you on my show, which is going to be so fun.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
I'm looking forward to that.
So let's go and kind of pivot, as you suggested. I want a part of my podcast when I originally started, and it's transformed a whole lot into more of this success story, messy success story of entrepreneurs. And I didn't originally plan for that. I originally planned for it to be about this understanding of mind, body, and soul alignment and what that means to each individual. And I'm realizing more and more that a lot of successful entrepreneurs understand that from their own frame of mind. And it's not always the same as mine, but I would love to hear from a mind, body, soul perspective, both biblically speaking, but also just from your own experience, how do you kind of align yourself in that regard and move forward on a daily basis?
Yeah, so what comes to mind when you ask that question is my word of the year. So I always, like a lot of people, I choose a word of the year every year that I feel like God's just really leading me towards, or something that he wants to grow me in throughout that year. And this year was steadfast. And God really gave me that word last fall, just in really thinking, like you're saying, in mind, body, and soul, all aspects of life. That is one word that I want to cover my life. No matter what I'm doing or what I'm chasing after or what I'm spending my time doing. And so that's something that I've been really focused on, and that impacts every area of my life, right? And so I also think that through the season that I just went through, everything about my normal got disrupted.
Yeah.
Which was really hard. But once kind of the dust started settling from all of that, I had the opportunity to create a new normal, which is a beautiful thing. And so in that, I've had the opportunity to decide, okay, now I work totally remotely from our house, which gives me a lot more time freedom than I had when I was commuting to the corporate job that I had before the wedding and all of that. And so for me, creating not a checklist for my life, because I've been in seasons where I've had a very legalistic mindset, and that's something that I do not believe in at all, but just creating rhythms for myself that allow me to live a steadfast life, right? And so each morning I grab a cup of coffee and spend time with the Lord before I start working, and that sets the pace for my day. I think that matters. I think there's a trend in kind of the personal development space right now of, and it's well intended, of, getting up earlier, drinking all the water, doing all the things, chasing after, your dreams, and you're your own hero, and that kind of mindset, which just, I don't know that really matches up with God's economy of kind of what he has in store for us. And so my heart and what God's really been showing me is, before I go into the world, the most important thing I could do is spend time with him. My days are different when I do. And so to a listener who maybe hasn't had that rhythm for a while, or wherever you're at with that, I would just encourage you, even if it's 10 minutes, just starting your day in that way matters. Yeah. And as far as fitness, that's another, or just my body, that's another piece that I think after a short season, I'm starting to get a grasp on as well. I'm a huge runner. I ran several marathons before I got married, and that was a huge part of my life. And now I have actually started running again for the first time since I moved, with just a group of stay-at-home mamas from our church that needed to get out of the house and were going crazy with all their tiny humans at home during quarantine. And so we've gotten in a really good pattern of meeting and just have created that accountability for that, which has been just a beautiful thing to watch. And for the first time, I think in my life, running isn't about performance, but it's about just enjoying hearing the birds chirp and laughing with people that I love. Yeah. And so that's been a beautiful thing. So I think God has really, over time, began to kind of recreate what that is supposed to look like in my life, with all aspects of, what you just asked. Yeah. And so that's been really cool to kind of walk through.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I love that. I loved the word that you said, rhythm, because I'm kind of an anti-person when it comes to balance, which is bizarre because balance beam was like my go-to with gymnastics for 16 years growing up. And I always thought like balance is what you're aiming for. And as we like unpack what balance looks like in our life, it's really difficult if you're only focused on creating balance. Like, you're bound to fall if there's balance, where alignment is this idea that like, if you're looking at a straight line, and I've never actually said this out loud, but just always been a visual, like you can kind of weave off that line. Naturally, like, habits are going to fall when there's quarantine status, or if you get married and that adjustment happens where you're like, oh, let's just be together every day, and you totally don't worry about working out at all. Or if, there's a life crisis and your mental health goes off track, it's less about having to get back on the horse, because so many times I've said, like, it's okay, I'll eat this extra tub of ice cream, I'll start on Monday, when in fact I should just be like, I'll start now. And pushing myself back into the alignment of that line at any given time, but also giving yourself grace during those experiences that lead you off. And I think that's where like a lot of people get stuck, is they get stuck in like the shame component of, oh, I'm off balance, I fell off the horse, and now it's really hard to get back on. It shouldn't really be like that. It should be more of like, okay, you're teeter-tottering, let's keep going, and that being understanding. So I love rhythm, because that's just like a song in the sense that you have your high chords and your low chords, but overall, if you presented a song to a worship artist or a musician, they're going to know the melody, and they're going to know and understand that at the end of the day, it's all going to come back to that space, and it's going to sound really good to the ear. So I love rhythm. I think that that's such a beautiful word to use. Yeah, it's a good visual. So you also mentioned God's economy and like what that looks like from the perspective of our Christian faith. And obviously we've been in a really interesting quarantine status, like pandemic. And it's been very interesting to navigate as somebody who is invested in a lot of different types of people. I don't have like a one-track community that I hang out with because I'm a coach, but also because of the life that I used to lead and the life that I lead now, and wanting to still provide light in the places that are dark, and knowing the importance of that, but also having to really create a lot of boundaries in that. And so do you have insight into, or even just opinion towards, the traditional news, happening versus the conspiracy theorists versus like the overly healthy versus the, I don't care, I'm never gonna, I'm gonna go and spend time in a crowd? Like, how have you kind of navigated that, and what insight do you give to potentially your ministry or the church in that regard?
Oh man, what a great question. So, insight into my past history. So I grew up in the church. I grew up in an extremely traditional church environment. I would argue even on the brink of legalistic. So meaning my relationship with God was really a checklist and a set of rules until I graduated high school. And when I went to college, I was really afforded the opportunity for the first time to, find a new church family on my own, totally and completely on my own. My relationship with Jesus was my choice. And for the first time, I was in a really great small group Bible study environment. And I just had a lot of people pour into me in that season. That was very formative for me in kind of the beginning of the undoing of that concept for me, that my relationship with God was not a set of rules. And so, I think what I would advise somebody in your shoes, where you're trying to find the balance, right, of we are called to be a light in dark places, and also you're in this new season where you're in your walk with the Lord and you also want to invest there. I think it's both and. It is a hard balance. So, I always come back to just our greatest commandment, right, is to love God with our full heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves, in that order, right? And so when I am spending time with God and that's consistent in my life, what spills out of me is Him. And I can trust that, right? Like, I've got a water bottle right here, and if I tip this water bottle over, something's going to spill out of it, right? And in our lives, if we view almost that same metaphor as our life as a cup, we're going to be filled with something. And it's either going to be truth and the love of Christ, or something the world has to offer us, right? And so I think what we invest in and what we do in those times where we're, maintaining those rhythms like we talked about, that's filling our cup, right? And then when we go out into the world and we're serving our people, or we're being a light in a dark place, when our cup is full of the love of Christ, then when our cup spills over onto people, that's what spills. And I think if I were to wrap up my hope for, anything I'm doing, or how I speak into people, or how I serve people, when my cup spills, I want it to be Jesus. And, to any of those people groups that you explained when you asked your question, I think that's what I would come back to,
Yeah, it's really good. I love that. I always love the analogy of like water specifically because, Jesus calls himself the living water, and it's also like fundamental for our existence just by science. If you want to be like science driven only, like you have to have it. And therefore the analogy biblically is just so beautiful and something I constantly live by. I also always have water bottle like that is with me all the time, to the point where my nieces are always like, Aunt Tamra, why are you always carrying that water bottle? And this is before like carrying your water bottle was cool, right? Where it had like stickers and all the stuff all over it. This is like prior to that season. And I always could almost hold it. like as a continual reminder in the spaces that were dark or are dark, as my reminder, because I've spoken over what the water means to me so much. And I've also had such a huge shift in my body and mind and physicality because of drinking water, because of utilizing that water intake when I'm working out and thereafter, and what it's done for my skin and what it's done for my gut and what it's done for my sleep patterns. And like, it's just unbelievable what something such as water can fundamentally do. And then knowing that Jesus is that and so much more. If we could infiltrate ourselves with that on a continual basis, why would you not? Right? Yeah. Why would you even choose the soda, which I was never a soda drinker, but it's a good analogy for most people. Like, why would you even choose that if you knew you had this amazing option? And when you did choose it, you're going to see an immediate response or result. And therefore, what does that usually mean? It means you crave the thing that makes you full, and you crave the thing that is overflowing with positivity and joy and light and love and all of those things that he is.
Oh, you're going to love this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Another really quick analogy. I went to Israel last year.
Oh, gosh, I want to do that so bad.
A group of people from our church in our state. And it was one of the most life-changing things I've ever done. I don't read my Bible the same. I never will. And I can't wait to go back. I tell people, if you're listening and you have any desire to go see the Holy Land, do whatever it takes to go. I mean, start saving today. It will truly change your life. And one day we went to the Dead Sea, which is, of course, a lot of people know is the lowest place, in terms of sea level in the world. And we drove from Jerusalem all the way down to the Dead Sea, and you pass through the Judean desert, and where Jesus was tempted. All these things in the Bible. So I mean, you're just walking and traversing all of this land that you have read about your whole life. And the closer we got to the Dead Sea, I was just blown away at how gorgeous it was.
Wow.
I mean, it is absolutely, totally breathtaking. And we stood at the top of Masada. If you're familiar with the story of Masada, we went to the top of Masada, and at the top you could see the Dead Sea really as far as you could see. And we actually didn't go down and get in the water, which a lot of people do. We just didn't have time that day. But on the bus, I remember just thinking, man, this is such a gorgeous body of water. But if I were to get in the water and drink it, it could kill me. The salinity of the water is, I forget how much saltier than even, regular ocean water. It's crazy. You float when you get in,
the buoyancy.
But you cannot ingest the water. And to think, there's so many things I think in our lives that we look at and we think, man, that's really beautiful, or that's really pretty, or that is very enticing. But then when we get down to that water, we realize, like, wow, that's really dangerous. And so I think the Dead Sea has almost became this metaphor for me of just really keeping my eyes on my lane and keeping my eyes on the Lord, and filling my cup with Him, because otherwise it's so easy to get, focused on all the shiny, happy other things, especially in the 3, and it can take our eyes off kind of really what God has for us. And so when I think back to our Israel trip, that's one of the places that I love to visit, but it was just such a good reminder to me of just keeping my eyes in the right place,
So good. And it's like, it's making me have full body chills, because I always know that my podcasts are so intentional with time, because this is such valuable quality time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew, but last year I only had guests that were in person. And this is the first year that I've done people virtually, which was great that I started that in January, considering what happened. But there is such intentionality
in my time with this, but every single time God shows up in such an incredible way. And I never know how it's going to be because we don't prep these, and I don't ask, informational questions prior to, and situations like this where they're not people in my community, I really don't know like the fullness of who you are. I like can socially, figure you out, but oftentimes it's really different than what, you experience. And it's our heart as Christians, of course, for our social presence to be the same as our heart presence. But you're talking about shiny objects, and I have had quite a week of having a shiny objects in the corner of my eye. To the point where I had a mentor and an SEO strategist and marketing strategist that I work for sent me an email that I didn't get until like the wee hours of the morning, and I'm an early riser, and he had sent it before I went to bed, but I didn't get it till about 4:30 in the morning, and I was praying, and I was like, God, like I really need clarity on this. I don't know. And I'm looking to get a mentor, a coach, cool, if you will, in my business, because I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, there's a lot of growth, which is amazing. I'm so grateful. Owe it all to Jesus, but I'm not sure what the right growth strategy is right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I was like praying, and I had an amazing conversation with this woman who was across the world, and all the insight that she gave me and the strategy and all of that was so good and different than anything else that I had ever heard. So I was really being drawn to her shininess, if you will. And so praying to God in the early morning and just being like, I need clarity. I need to hear from you. I don't know if this is the right thing. And ironically, the night before, when I was unpacking the idea with my mom and my husband, my mom had asked me like, okay, what's the pro and what's the con? And I'm actually her business coach, so it was cool to have her like flip the script and be mom for a minute, and her to say that. And I'm like, oh, I actually haven't unpacked that. Let's go there. And my number one response was, I don't think she's Christian. And I didn't know for sure, and then she didn't say one way or another. And when I had shared about my faith and in the congruency of what it is with what I do now, she just said, that's awesome. And like, she talked about spirit and kind of that worldly concept of a higher being. But I never heard like Jesus, and I never heard God per se. So that was like my number one thing that I kind of kept hold of as my con as I went to bed. So same thing, praying through that in the morning and knowing, God, you've put me in this realm where I feel like I have an opportunity in the secular world based on this entrepreneurship journey that so many secular, minded people are in. There's nothing wrong with that. But how can I use the gifts that you've given me from a heart set and help like align people, right? Yeah. And so I wake up, I get out of bed after having this prayer and still having no clarity, just like, okay, I'm going to start my day. Now's the time. And I open my email, and I get this email from that guy that I mentioned, and it said, there will always be shiny objects. That's it. And I immediately was like, all right, I'll take that to heart. I'll go there. And so then I jump on my computer, and I'm working through a course right now with a teacher virtually, which is always great, but that's where I was like looking for somebody that like I could make eye contact with and like actually talk to. And the first thing that came on was, there will always be shiny objects. And I was like, okay. So the fact that you're saying that, and like, oh my gosh, it's so good. That's so cool. Because we could, I could go and I could get in the Dead Sea, and I could enjoy like the amazing experience of floating, right? And like not having the weight and it being beautiful. But the moment that I take that water in, it now becomes not healthy.
Toxic.
Right. And so I am just grateful. I obviously made the choice at that point that I wasn't moving forward in that relationship with her, and reached out to her and let her know. And I felt so much peace about it. And so it's just, this is like a God wink. I always talk about God winks. Like he winks at us all the time. And I'm going to hold this part of our conversation really dearly, because I needed it. And I need people to know who are listening that like, even people who are rooted get distracted.
Yes.
And that's my word this year, has been rooted. And it has been so imperative for me that as I make even business decisions that are secularly, seen from other people, whether you're changing your prices or you're publicizing something, that at the heart of hearts, the heart of what it is that I'm doing, it has nothing to do with money, and it has everything to do with Jesus. And so for me to say that I'm a faith-based women's coach that then takes a coaching person who's coaching me who's not in her faith, like, how stupid is that? So I just needed God to say, like, it's shiny, it looks really pretty, but it's lackluster inside, and it's going to leave you empty. So good. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It was like the perfect finale.
I love when God does that. That's really cool.
Every single time. So good. So y'all, I have had the Do the Thing Movement podcast image up here alongside the Fit and Faith podcast. This is what this podcast and my community and her community is all about. It's about women supporting women. It's about bringing people into the fold. It's about loving on people hard and knowing that there is more than enough for all of us. And I want you to kind of like leave people with your last, like, penmanship, your signature, Rebecca, if you will, whatever it be, whatever you feel like called to share as a finale, a tie up the bow.
Yeah, I love it. So I have this conversation all the time with people in our community, but I think if I could leave people with anything, it's that, we see in Scripture everywhere that God has prepared something unique to you that just in a way that nobody else can glorify him, that you are called to do, right? You have a circle of influence and a people group and a community that nobody else living has access to or access to impact. And I think a lot of times we get caught in a lot of thought patterns, and that's what I'm writing about, that are not from God. And we get trapped in our own thinking, and I hate when I see that get in the way of what God is doing through somebody. And so I would say, a lot of things we've talked about, just take inventory of those things in your life, whether it's fear or it's imposter syndrome or it's feeling judgment or it's feeling terrified of your calling. Really take a look at kind of those thought patterns and those repetitive things that keep coming up, and just ask yourself the question, is this coming from God or is this coming from the enemy? And then second, what's my step of faith, or what's my next, step of obedience that I can take towards my calling and towards what God has for me? And don't take your eyes off of that, right? We all have a lane that we're called to walk in, we're called to run in. Keep your eyes on him, and just don't give up.
So good. Yeah. So good. And when we stay focused, like at the end of the road, they talk about like the light at the end of the tunnel, or wherever that vision is casting, like above all shiny things, like he is the shiniest. So staying like just focused on that area. And I'm so grateful to be in community with you. I'm so grateful to have had this conversation, and I just feel like there was so much goodness in it. So thank you for the wealth of just heart that you brought to it. And I'm excited to join you on your podcast in the coming weeks.
Yes, it's going to be a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Before you pop off, share with everyone. I've kind of given them a layout throughout the time, but how can they get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
Yep. So dothethingmovement.com is our website. Obviously, Do the Thing Movement podcast, you can listen to that anywhere you get your podcast. And we have an Insiders Facebook group that's super fun, and you can find me on Facebook as well. My Instagram is under my name, just Rebecca Dotson George. And that's pretty much all the places.
Yay. I think at the beginning when you just said your name, I flip-flopped George Dotson, didn't I? Did you notice that?
Maybe.
I think
it's
okay. Okay, either way. I got the names right. There's that.
That's right.
All right, girlfriends. Such a pleasure. Have a beautiful day, and we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm Tamra Andress. I'm your Fit and Faith host, and I am so excited to just be here to share with you other movers, dreamers, shakers, entrepreneurs, pastors, whatever. If you've got a head and you've got a heart, I'm so excited to explore who that is, whose you are, and discover your wholeness, your health, your wealth, and your joy. I love to exude happiness. I want people to know that this is not, this came with trial. You guys, this came with a lot of effort. This came with a lot of lows and so many highs. And I want us to experience those together. This is a real community of dreamers, and I'm excited to help catapult your calling, your kingdom experience, the purpose of your imprint on the world, wherever, however that is. So come along for the ride. I'm excited to chat with you. Like, comment, review, send me a DM, send me an email. It's me responding, even though I have an incredible team. And so I'm just excited to get to know you. Let's connect, let's create community, and let's walk in our calling.